And parenting is the toughest job on the planet as far as I'm concerned, because you care so deeply. So all your emotions are engaged at a high level of intensity. So the pain is at a high level of intensity.
Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we connect, engage, and empower fathers to be the best dads they can be for their families and communities. And now, your hosts are Bruce Stapleton and Pastor Eli Williams.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Eli Williams, and this is the Fathering Strong podcast. We are delighted that you're with us today. I'm excited to have as our guest today Ted N. Strader. Strader is a good friend and quite the expert in a number of areas. He's a literal, well, I think you're a Renaissance man, but I can't say the word. So we're really happy that you could join us today, Ted. Welcome.
Thanks, Pastor Williams. I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to call you Eli from now on.
Please do. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Ted is a nationally recognized trainer, curriculum writer. He's got excellent stuff, and he's got a passion for fatherhood, and it shows up in the work that he does. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. But Ted, like what I like to do with my guests is talk a little bit about you.
Uh-huh.
And I want to start, as I usually do, by asking about your father's story. Now, everybody's got a father story. It's good, it's bad, it's ugly. It's just all over the map. But everybody has one. What's yours?
Shoot, I've got lots of father stories. You want to go with me as a father or my father's story? Or
let's start with you and your father. Why don't we start there?
Okay. Well, my father, my first memory of my father is my sister dragging me behind the couch and saying, "Big Jim's coming." And she was scared. And I thought, well, I guess I'm scared with you. So she took me behind the couch, and we heard a loud voice enter the house and a conversation go on that seemed rather normal to me. And then he left. And then she said, "That's Dad. He was visiting." And she was scared because of her past experience. And I didn't have a lot of experience at all. Then I had a few subsequent meetings over the years, but really didn't get to know my father till I was, about 21 or 22. After I'd begun teaching high school, I had enough money. I had the summer off. I said, I'm going to go find my dad and see why he never was in my life and what's the story here and what's going on. Kind of like I needed to know where I came from. So I found him in Florida. I got on an airplane, flew down, met him, and it was weird and wild and interesting and fun and painful. And it started a big lifelong relationship that never was very fulfilling on the receiving end, but it was fulfilling enough for me to understand how he got where he was, why I was where I was in my life. And because of my own resilience, I guess I was able to forgive him for not being there for me, able to forgive him for some of the pain I saw him cause for other people in my family. And I think forgiveness is divine. And I think that really put me on a nice path to think about this more deeply and more open-heartedly and with compassion. And so that story, one of the things I learned was that he abused alcohol heavily. He probably had anxiety disorder as well, was probably self-medicating from my interviews. Now that I have all this knowledge and skill from training, but I could sense all of that. And I kind of felt bad for him and bad about him, and decided I was just going to be the best son he ever had. And I think I fulfilled that. And I think that matters a lot. Who we are and how we respond to our difficulties tells us and the world who we are and who we want to be. So I think I made some good choices there as a young man, and then that's the start of it all for me.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. There's a lot we could unpack there.
Quick and dirty, as best I can do.
We could probably spend the time just talking about that. But let's move forward then. But you also are a father yourself.
Yes.
So talk about that. What's your father's story from Ted's perspective?
Well, it's related. So I had in my first, I was building my nonprofit agency in my young adulthood, and I was really focused on that. I developed a substance abuse prevention agency, so I didn't get married until I was in my early 30s. And I married a woman who actually had 4 children, whose husband had divorced and had suffered from addiction. So I kind of knew that story and how it kind of related to my story. And subconsciously, I think we're drawn to heal ourselves in ways like that. So I married a woman who had 4 daughters, and 3 of them were triplets. So I was trained and educated by my wife and her 4 daughters in how to be a daughter dad. And that's challenging when you grow up without a father and you've got a lot of, let's just say your own issues to deal with. So I think I still have a wonderful relationship with my daughters, my stepdaughters, but her mother and I divorced, 10 to 12 years later, based on some difficulties in her life and part of her story, which isn't mine to tell. So I'll just say we divorced in a friendly sort of way, but I still have a deep and ongoing relationship with my stepdaughters, and I remarried and had a biological daughter. So another girl in my life, and she turns 18 next month and graduates from high school. And all of my daughters, except for my youngest, are married and have children. So I'm a grandpa to several children as well. So is that enough for you, Eli? Does that round it out a little bit?
All right. So far in your parenting, what has been the biggest challenge for you? What has challenged you most?
Well, I think what challenged me most is staying in touch with that compassionate part of me when I'm frustrated, overwhelmed, anxious, nervous, scared, or angry. I mean, parenting is probably the hardest job on the planet. I've written several parenting curriculums, fatherhood programs, marriage programs, trauma programs. And parenting is the toughest job on the planet as far as I'm concerned, because you care so deeply. So all your emotions are engaged at a high level of intensity. So the pain is at a high level of intensity. The fears are high level of intensity, the angst, the worry, the concern. And if you've got, some issues with your emotional upbringing or development, you're going to be challenged, and you're going to be challenged wholeheartedly when you care wholeheartedly. So I think the greatest challenge is to stay in touch with my compassion and understanding the other person or the other people and understanding what they're feeling, especially with children who can't always express it with clarity and insight. They just maybe blow up or just go off. And as a young man, that's what I did. That's all I knew to do too. So I have some compassion, but the hardest thing is tapping in that when necessary and calming yourself down so you can be there for other people. That's the general most difficult thing about being a dad.
All right. So one last thing about that.
Keep going. I'm with you.
What has been your greatest joy? What has brought you the most joy in your parenting?
Wow. I mean, when you say that, the first instant is when my biological daughter was born. She came out of the womb and immediately heard my voice and immediately reached her hand out toward that voice. And I stuck my finger and she grabbed my finger and she held on to that until they cleaned her up, wiped her off, and started to wrap her up. And buddy, that was pure, unadulterated joy. But so that's one. But I'm very joyful watching young people learn and develop the ability to make decisions, especially when they learn from a negative decision and turn around and can vocalize, and then their behavior backs up the positive decision making they learn from either watching somebody else's mistakes or from their own mistakes or from listening to the minister or the teacher or the parent who says, hey, this probably isn't a good idea. I get a lot of joy out of watching their minds work through. And, everybody's got free will. At least that's the way it looks to me. And I respect that deeply. So I like seeing them express their will in positive ways for well-being and for nurturance and for self-nurturance and for connectedness to others and for, making decisions where everybody wins instead of everybody loses. I like seeing that on a regular basis. And I get a lot of that.
All right. Excellent. I want to ask you a question now related to the work that you do. Why don't you give sort of a semi-brief overview of the work that you do, your agency, the products related to your agency. I want to ask you after we take a break about the relationship between good parenting and substance abuse. I also want to talk about trauma and how that impacts
Great.
relationships and parenting and all that. But first,
Well,
an overview of your agency and the work
sure.
that you do as a professional.
Well, you're directing me into my wheelhouse, as you well know. So let's just start from the beginning. So I was a school teacher, and I had a child overdose in my classroom, and I saw that the school system didn't have any policies or procedures to address it. I literally physically carried this child to the office, asked them what policy they had, and they said they didn't know. And I'm like, what? Well, wait a minute. Somebody said, call the police. I said, well, how about let's call EMS? Their life matters more than their arrest record or their criminal behavior. This was a 14 or 15-year-old kid. So I didn't like that. It upset me that the school system that I was in at the time didn't have any policies and procedures. So I became interested in that topic. I got out of teaching. I did something else for a year or two, but then I felt called to work in the substance abuse area. So I took a job with a paint sniffing prevention agency in the inner city. I was making probably $30,000 a year as a school teacher at that time, and I took a job for $9,000 to be the education coordinator to help look at these young people that were actually sniffing paint rags, toluene, glue, any hydrocarbon solvent they could get their hands on to escape the pain that they lived in. And it was a poor neighborhood, and they were coming from families with lots of disruption. We'll talk about society and kind of roles that influence fatherlessness and substance abuse, because I think they're inextricably related. But I went on to build an alcohol and drug prevention agency, focusing on prevention, not treatment. Most people don't know the difference, but there's a huge difference between preventing something that hasn't happened yet,
sure,
and treating something that is a major, either you can call it a disorder or a disease or a major mental health issue. So it's one thing to have a drink; it's something else to get drunk, and it's a third thing to have a treatable problem with alcohol or drugs. So I was focused on the prevention side, and I started designing programs. I mean, the guy I worked for first, he was just, hey, let's let them play soccer. That'll help them get away from this stuff. I'm like, I don't think that's enough, buddy. So I slowly took the agency over and became the executive director and started writing programs to help people develop skills, emotional skills, insight, how to gain and trust and support. And I started seeing some hopes and glimmers of hope for change and for improvement. But at that time, I didn't even know the difference between prevention and treatment my own self, but I knew I wanted to prevent it before it started. Mm-hmm. As I went on, I started to work with those school systems, and I studied some of the best programs in the country, and I adopted one called CASPAR, Cambridge and Somerville Program for Alcohol Rehabilitation Prevention Program, K through 12. Oddly enough, I raised enough money, built enough friends and strategic alliances with other partners that I got both the Catholic schools in our town, the private schools, and the public schools to agree to let me institute that prevention program in their schools with funding, and my agency led the training thereof. So we trained all the teachers, all the principals, all the counselors, administrators in two major school systems in our town in Louisville, Kentucky, for a period of 10 years. And I learned a lot about training. I learned a lot about education. I learned a lot about curriculum, nuances, and implementation. And I started really incorporating that into writing my own programs because of life experience that I had. So I developed, I wrote a grant to get the money to research the effectiveness of what I thought would work in substance abuse prevention. So it's a very comprehensive program. It's for both parents and youth. So there's an adult component of about 16 to 20 sessions, 2 hours each, hour and a half at least each, and similar number of sessions for youth, where the adults get their training in one setting while the youth get their training in a separate setting, because we learn differently. young people and adults learn different. Then we bring them together and practice. And I did receive that grant, and we did a 5-year study, and actually got behavioral change results. And I became recognized as an effective program developer. And then that grew into kind of a national project. I mean, people were purchasing my program all over the country. So that program now is in use in 50 states and 6 other countries. And I subsequently adapted it to work just with fathers, because fathers are real different than mothers, and mothers are different from fathers, but both are parents. But people learn in different kinds of settings, and some people are just more comfortable with people who are like them. Now, that's true in terms of age. It's true in terms of race. It's true in terms of gender. It's true. People like to learn where they're comfortable with people that are like them. They actually learn in that, especially emotional skills, especially high intense emotional issues like substance abuse, like spouse abuse, child abuse, expressing emotions, trauma. People want to feel sort of safe in the group they're with to address those kinds of issues. So we followed that lead and developed fatherhood programming, marriage programming, and now trauma programming. And we've written 3 programs that are on multiple national registries of evidence-based programs and practices. So NREP was the first one of those out of SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They over about 15 years identified 300 programs that were effective, and my team and I wrote 3 of those 300. So we had about 1% of that market, and just that's gone on for I guess I've been doing this for 35 years or more. And I just recently completed a trauma curriculum that puts it together. So all of these are adaptations of that original work, because when something works, you just want to improve it. And that's the way the research is supposed to be. It's everybody kind of wants to create their own thing. But the truth is, what really is helpful is to take something that works, and then everybody should try to make it better.
Excellent.
And that's kind of a quick, that's as fast as I can do it, Eli. I hope that was
very good. Perfect. After this break, I want to drill down a little bit. We have parents that tune in. Our target is fathers, but we found that we have just as many women and mothers who tune into the podcast as well. So when we come back after this break, let's drill down a little bit and talk about substance abuse prevention when it comes to what parents can do regarding their children, getting healthy themselves, but also in helping their children. My guest today is Ted N. Strader, and we'll have more with him after this short time out on the Fathering Strong podcast. Stay with us.
We dads and father figures need each other. We need a safe, non-judgmental place to share our stories, challenges, heartaches, and joys. Fathering Strong is just such a place. A new online community of connected, engaged, and empowered fathers. Learn more at www.fatheringstrong.com.
Welcome back. Ted Strader is my guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams, and Bruce Stapleton is the wizard behind the curtain who makes it all happen. Ted Strader is my guest. Ted, we're so glad that you're here today. Thank you for sharing the history, sort of how it all began when it comes to your award-winning program. You talked somewhat about substance abuse prevention. Now, let's say we've got a mom or a dad watching this or listening to this podcast, and they've been struggling with substance abuse themselves, and they're a parent. What should an individual do? What would be their first steps in getting the help that they need? If they've already, unfortunately, become addicted, they want to get some help for themselves, but they also are concerned that they don't want to pass that on to their children.
Well, that's a really neat question, and I'm going to answer it 2 ways. First, it's kind of like they say on the airlines, if we lose cabin pressure, put the mask on first for yourself. So step 1 is to seek help for yourself for the addiction. If they're already into addiction, they're already into trouble from alcohol or any substance use disorder, any disruption in their family, it's helpful to seek assistance for yourself first. But my second answer is this. It's hard to recognize whether you have a problem or not when it's you. It's easy for somebody else to say, oh, you've got a problem. It's something else to say, wait a minute, this isn't working for me. Because people that develop substance use disorder, and by any name, because people will talk about alcoholism, cocaine addiction, fentanyl addiction, any substance use, it doesn't matter what the substance is. But if there's repeated trouble in a person's life with their using substances, then you have a disorder. So step one is get help for yourself. But it's hard to see it in yourself. So what I do, let me give you an example from our programs. I write my programs so that people who are abstainers, people who are social users, people that are pretty regular abusers, and people who are actually suffering from addiction are all welcome to come in as parents to help their children. And I will tell you that you design the programming so that they reflect on their life experience to date with substances and in their families in a well-facilitated curriculum that takes one step at a time without judgment, without criticism, and people will self-assess. And they assess on two things. They assess on, do I have a problem or not? I know some people say I do, but I don't think I do. But it's their own assessment that matters most. Nobody's going to do anything about it until they're convinced it's an issue. So we help people do kind of a quiet self-assessment in the group for themselves, but also to think about what would help their children avoid having a problem in their life. Because everyone, the abstainer, the social user, the abuser, the regular abuser, and even the chemically dependent, none of them want their children to have a problem with addiction. It's a terribly painful state of being. So we also ask them to think about what would be helpful for their children to help avoid developing a problem on their own right. And that's not as easy, and it's not as cut and dried as a lot of people are going to say. A lot of people are going to say, well, just tell them never use. Well, that's a little bit of a one-size-fits-all approach that doesn't really work for very many people.
It's pretty naive.
Well, naive and superficial, and it's one size fits all, and it doesn't generally work. It's something. It might be a consideration, but it's hard to say that that's the answer. But the main thing is for us is for help people to understand the difference between, let's just take the drug alcohol, because most people in America know the drug alcohol, and they know it two ways. They know it as a beverage, and they also know it as alcoholism or addiction or alcohol use disorder. They can see these differences. So you can use common language. You can use examples to help people understand that it's one thing to drink, it's something else to be drunk, something else to be alcoholic or have alcohol use disorder. And then help them to recognize what they really want for their children along that continuum. And nobody wants alcohol use disorder for their children. So then what might help their children to develop more appropriate decision making? Well, first of all, what are you role modeling? I mean, what have they seen? Because parents, even when they're not the best parents, have the most influence, positively or negatively. And lots of children from alcoholic families will say, I'll never have a drink, because they've seen the pain. Yeah, but if that's done out of fear and anger for a certain period of their life, that's one decision. But then a later period of life, they're away from that, and then they try alcohol and it feels good. They might change that decision very rapidly because it's so simplistic, and they might move in another direction. Then they don't have the skills to think about what's happening to them and their relationship with this drug when they're using it. So at the risk of making it sound more complex, it's important for everyone to come to their own understanding of what they want, who they want to be, how they want to be in their life, and to make decisions around that. Now, people say, oh, gosh, people are born with alcoholism in their family. They're destined to be alcoholic. They're predestined. They have the genetic predisposition. And so it's really important to also break that down and make that a little more clear. Yes, children from alcoholic families are more likely to develop a problem than children from the general population, but they're also more likely to abstain than the general population because they've seen the pain and they don't want it. So it doesn't work that simplistically. What happens is when people have an understanding of what they've seen, what they've experienced, positive and negative from the use of any substance, and can develop an understanding how that might change over time, you can do prevention. It's not this is that. People used to say, oh, you use cocaine once and you're addicted. People say today, you use fentanyl once, you're addicted. It's not true. It's not true for any drug. The more potent the drug is, the more likely that you'll develop an addiction more quickly, but it's not guaranteed with one use. So it's never as simple as you will hear in the bumper stickers. So it takes some time. So when I work with parents who have those concerns, I help them, first of all, learn to understand and comfort themselves with wherever they are, whether they're fearful because of the past with their parents, whether they're fearful of their own use and how that could be affecting their children. Let's deal with the fear and the feelings of judgment. And let's set that aside and look at it just as calmly as we can and come to an understanding of what our deepest wishes are for ourselves and for our families. And from there, we can figure it out. Now, if somebody's suffering from addiction, treatment is certainly going to be recommended, but it's not required. A person to do effective prevention with your children, but it's certainly more likely to lead to success for your children than ongoing use. I'll also say this, a person who's gone into a substance use disorder or an addiction who has gotten treated is in a great place to do wonderful prevention with their children. They can talk about it from so many different angles. And if they don't let themselves get overwhelmed with each separate experience, they can do a really good job of helping children understand that they have a genetic risk that's greater than other people. They also could teach them, hey, I've made that mistake and I like myself better now. A lot of people say, oh, no, that tells kids that they can do it and get away with it. Some children will interpret that way, but not all. And you can help them shape their understandings as you continue to go through life with them. So prevention really is a long-term process. It's not a one-hour show or a one lecture response. It's a lifetime of interactions to help young people come to a clarity with what it is. There's a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation out there. So I'm worried that I'm getting too deep into the weeds, Eli. But was that a fair response?
Oh, I don't know how it could be any better. Thank you for that.
Okay.
And we're going to continue our conversation with Ted Strader. So you stay right there. This is the Fathering Strong podcast.
Do you know a new father who could benefit from a basic introduction to healthy fathering principles? POPS 101, a free online course consisting of 4 one-hour sessions in English or Spanish, could be perfect for him. POPS 101 lays out practical steps toward becoming the protector, order keeper, provider, and stabilizer his child needs. Learn more at urbanlight.org.
My guest today is Ted Strader. Strader, my friend, has been in this fatherhood work and alcohol and other substance abuse prevention for a long time, 30 plus years. Has won awards for widespread national recognition for his work. Just Google Ted Strader and you'll see what I mean. And we're delighted and really feel especially blessed, Ted, that you're joining us today on the Fathering Strong podcast. It's been a great conversation so far.
I'm equally blessed to be here.
I want to talk to you some about trauma. How do you approach trauma when it comes to your own individual life and also how it impacts your parenting?
Well, trauma has gotten to be a pretty hot topic. Let me tell you about my introduction to trauma. As a child, I was introduced to trauma by abandonment from a father, abandonment from a father who probably suffered from either addiction and or anxiety disorder who left, and all of the family interactions that you can imagine might have come from that. Mm-hmm. So I suffered from trauma. So trauma, 75% of the people in the United States go through multiple traumatic experiences. And all but about 25% do so and adapt and learn to live normal and reasonably healthy lives in spite of that fact. So I'm kind of one of those people. But 25% actually don't. 25% have serious changes and challenges coming from that trauma. So trauma is something that is ubiquitous, commonplace, but at the same time, some trauma is different than other trauma, and each of us responds to it differently. So the way I approach trauma is with compassion and patience. It's really helpful to help people recognize whether they're dealing with trauma in successful ways or unsuccessful ways, because trauma is very common. So
give me an example, if you would,
sure,
on an unsuccessful way of dealing with trauma.
Well, the obvious one from my life experience has been substance abuse. If you self-medicate because you feel down and out and hurt and scared and abused, and you use drugs to change the way you feel, well, that's great for that moment, but it's not great if you do that repeatedly over and over and over again throughout a number of years. You're begging to develop another problem with addiction.
Yeah.
If you use unhealthy relationships to supplant the broken relationships where you experience trauma, if you see a young man or girl getting into a relationship with an abusive partner and they stay in it because they're kind of used to that, that's a not so great way to deal with trauma. So there's two quick examples.
Yeah.
Now, healthier ways include lots of different small skills that add up to well-being. First of all is some level of awareness of when you're experiencing a traumatic type response. When you're breathing harder, your heart rate goes up. When you start to feel triggered from a past trauma, but in today's world, something happens and you start feeling like you used to feel when it was when you were being harmed or hurt. Developing awareness of that. Okay, wait a minute, I'm starting to react to this. And then, so one is noticing an emotional change in your body. Two, learning how to name what emotion that is. And then three, examining, is this realistic now or not? Well, that's easy to say, but it's hard to do. So what we do, we created a trauma curriculum where people practice through self-awareness exercise, practice through skill building in these areas, and it's actually kind of fun, unless they get triggered, which can happen because you're talking about trauma. So it's important that you're thoughtful and careful as you design curriculums and learning experiences to help people grow beyond it. I'll pause there and see if you want to flesh out that question further, Eli.
Yeah. So you've got some training around this. Can someone who has not had any kind of formal education in dealing with trauma, helping people who have trauma,
yes,
are they able to actually do this work?
Well, let me just tell you, that is actually the goal of my program. It's one of the two. There's two major goals with trauma: helping people that have trauma learn to deal with it differently, and then helping people who know people who are experiencing trauma learn how to deal with it. So my program is known, it's called, all my curriculums are known by our tagline, Creating Lasting Family Connections. Creating lasting family connections matters to our human well-being. It relates to family, it relates to community, it relates to mental health. It relates to appropriate growth and development. We need healthy families to prosper. Human beings, I don't mean as individuals, we do better when we have a healthy family or social setting. So, the title of my curriculum is called Creating Lasting family connections, and it's overcoming and understanding trauma. It's important for the person who's suffering trauma to understand it, but it's also important for anybody that lives with somebody who's been traumatized to understand it. Because then you can get out of the middle of the problem by recognizing what's not you, what's their issue, what's yours, how can you be helpful, how can you show compassion, how can you be supportive, and how can you help them transform beyond the negative ramifications of trauma. People do better with a little help. So we train people to understand trauma, whether you have it in your own personal life or not. And like I said, 75% of the people do. And if you have personally successfully overcome it, you're actually in good shape to help somebody else successfully overcome it. So no, you do not have to have specialized skills and trainings prior to trying to assist others with trauma. It's helpful to understand it and have compassion for it. So we designed a program that's for both people who have suffered trauma and people who know people who've suffered trauma to understand and overcome it. And so it's full of insight and skills that help you either as the person who's identified as suffering from trauma or as someone who cares about somebody who suffered from trauma. And who of us doesn't have friends who've been traumatized?
That's right.
So it's exactly written to that purpose, to that point, to serve both.
Excellent. So how would someone, perhaps listening to this or watching us via video, and you've piqued their interest and they want to begin to work in this area to help folks who've been traumatized to recover from that, how might they go about connecting with you, learning more about your program, and getting involved, hopefully?
Well, if they specifically would like to work with me or my team, I can give a phone number and a web page. That's probably the easiest thing these days. You can call my office directly at 502-583-6820. That's COPES, the Council on Prevention, Education, and Substances. Or you can just contact my local nonprofit agency, which is copes.org. https copes.org, COPES.org. And there'll be lots of pages there. It's a pretty comprehensive website. It can be overwhelming because we have so many different successful programs. But short of that, you can call. We have a distributor for materials. If you're interested in materials only, you can call 502-897-1111. 502-897-1111. That's Resilient Futures Network, which does sales, distribution, and you can even organize trainings around the country, around the world with Resilient Futures Network. Resilient, I love the name. We're trying to help people's futures be resilient by networking with people who care.
Well, that's excellent. We will post this information also for folks who maybe didn't catch all that so that they can reach out to you, Ted, because the more people who've been trained by you and who are working in this area, then the more healthy families we're going to have and more loving and lasting relationships we're going to have. So we're all for it.
Let me tell you something about that trauma curriculum design. Our other curriculums are really designed for agencies to purchase and train their staff to implement: school systems, social service agencies, churches, recreation leagues, and so on. But for trauma, it's really interesting. I'm so convinced that people who recognize that trauma is an issue can be of help. We designed it so that we could train anybody, and they can then sell the curriculum and make a percentage of income off of it. If they like it, they can sell it and make commissions, up to 30% commissions. And if they like, they can co-train with us to people they sell it to, and we'll train them up to become certified trainers. And then they can build their own nonprofit agency or for-profit agency, selling their services to address trauma in their own communities using these materials. And it's kind of like we kind of decided to do a social services network marketing thing so that people could be people who care. We want to empower people who care to make the world better.
Yeah.
It's just like we did, just like you and I both made that choice. You as a minister, me as a substance abuse prevention and fatherhood trainer. Well, anybody can do that with training and support. So we give them ways to learn with us, sort of like an apprenticeship with us to learn and grow. And that's been real interesting and fun to do. And I love empowering people, as I said before.
My guest today has been Ted Strader. Ted is easily found. As I said, you can just Google him, or you could check our description here for this program. We will place his contact information, and I encourage you to get a hold of him if you're interested in learning more about what he has done, his great track record of success. And if you have the privilege to get to know him as an individual, that'll be a blessing to you as well. So, Ted, we appreciate you being with us today.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm a little worried I've turned it into an infomercial, and that wasn't my intention.
No, it was very, very entertaining. Very entertaining and informational. We appreciate it so much. You can't get much better than that.
Well, thank you very much, Eli. I really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Fathering Strong is our weekly blog, and we try to get something posted every Monday or Tuesday. We invite you to check that out as well. And of course, our Fathering Strong podcast you can view on YouTube and a number of other places. So we encourage you to tell others about it. And if you want more information about what we do at Urban Light Ministries, you can find all that at urbanlight.org. So thanks so much, Ted, and thank you for being with us, folks. We'll see you next time on the next edition of the Fathering Strong podcast.
Fathering Strong is powered by Urban Light Ministries, a not-for-profit organization serving the needs of families and children for nearly 30 years. Your support helps us continue turning the hearts of fathers to their children while meeting some of the immediate critical needs of struggling families with small children. Contributions of all sizes are welcomed at www.urbanlight.org.
The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Urban Light Ministries, with technical assistance from the Momentum Group, and Harold Rayford provides the theme music. So thank you for listening.